Welcome to the Happy Disruptors Podcast. If you're a creative thinker with an unconventional approach to your industry, you just might be a happy disruptor. Join your friends at the Great Outdoors Foundation for honest conversations about tackling critical issues like conservation with an uncritical disposition. If you like to smile and get things done, this is the podcast for you.
All right. Welcome back, everyone, to the Happy Disruptors Podcast. I am Kaitie Hartman, and I'm joined, as always, by Hannah Inman, the CEO of the Great Outdoors Foundation. Today, our guest needs almost no introduction, but we'll give him a few minutes anyway. Mr. Chris Costa, who currently serves as the GOF board chair.
Well, you're being far too kind. A little bit about myself. I'm president and CEO of Knapp Properties, which is a local for full-service real estate firm, which in my world means brokerage, development, management, all those good kind of things. But I've been with Knapp for about 28 years, and before that had come up through the public accounting ranks, which is, I think, given me kind of a unique perspective and set of tools as it relates to financial aspects of not just nonprofits, but business in general. And along the way, I've had just tremendous mentors that have helped me get to my current position. So very happy to be here.
Excellent. Glad to have you here.
So we're very happy to have you on the board of GOF, and I think you've been integral to our success, especially with our financial stability. But before we go into some of that, will you tell us just a little bit about how your life intersects with the Great Outdoors Foundation?
Well, what's interesting to me is when I first became a part of the Great Outdoors Foundation, is I thought of it as a pheasant hunters group. And I know I've said that to you before, but the people I knew that were associated with it were just people who like to go hunt on occasion. And it was a real grassroots organization from my perspective at that point in time. About 2020, well, it wasn't about, it was definitely 2020, about a month before the pandemic, I got a call from Joe Corfitz, who was the sitting finance chair for the Great Outdoors Foundation. And Joe, as you may remember, was the chief financial officer of Unity Point Health. And we'd had a relationship because we'd done some partnerships with them. And Joe had reached out and said, hey, I'm retiring from business, and I'd kind of like to retire from some of my nonprofit duties. Would you mind stepping into my role at Great Outdoors Foundation? I trust you. I know you know most of the stuff that I know, and I think you'd be a help to the organization. Well, I have a hard time saying no. I didn't know a ton about Great Outdoors, but lo and behold, I was very surprised in a positive way, because already Hannah was on board, and she was a great leader for the organization. And it just felt like at the time that this was a nonprofit that was set to be in growth mode, doing great things in central Iowa and beyond. So I said yes. That's sometimes that's the hardest thing to do, is get to yes, but I was very happy that I did.
Great.
So we might be a little bit different than a pheasant hunters organization, though we certainly we are very grassroots rooted and have changed our trajectory pretty significantly in the last 5 years during your time on the board. What would you say you are most proud of during your time with the organization?
I'd say, I don't know if you'd call it stratospheric, but the growth has been significant. And it all begins with having great leadership. Hannah's doing a wonderful job. She's surrounded herself with great people, which is the same thing I would tell any organization, that you can only be as good as your leadership team. So the foundation that has been laid in terms of personnel and leadership positions that are filled, and the trust that certainly you can place in your leadership team. But in those early days, we were counting nickels we have on our financial statements cash available to spend. And we kept a real keen eye on that because it wasn't always a number that we felt was significant enough to make sure that operations were funded for the period of time that we were looking forward to. So when you have those challenges and you overcome them, and now we're in a position where the growth in partnerships and the ability to attract public funding because of all of the great things that Great Outdoors is doing, that has really taken off over the last 5 years. And, you know, and I'm such an insignificant part of it, but it's been great to be a piece of that action.
Absolutely. Hannah, I saw you nodding your head several times during the dollars and cents. Would you agree? Tell us your perspective about the last 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone thinks of a nonprofit as, you know, you bootstrap, and certainly in the early years, you do need to bootstrap, right? That's what you're doing. It's a startup. But we've always tried to run it as a business. And as we privatize more government services, the need and the demand on a nonprofit is certainly significant, and it is actually something that needs to be more sophisticated. So I certainly had to change my thinking from nonprofit to more of a business, running this like a business and treating it. And Chris has been significantly important to helping shape that. And then just the Great Outdoors Board investing in me to get my MBA so that I had that background. But I mean, I would say that the sophistication needed, financial sophistication needed out of nonprofits is significantly different than it was maybe 10 or 20 years ago. I don't know if you feel the same, Chris.
Well, with the things that we're doing and the big projects that we have on the drawing board, you can't get there without the level of sophistication that we've tried to obtain over the last 2 or 3 years, especially.
I'm getting better at it, hopefully.
Yeah. It's always a process.
So as a CEO, I mean, one of the defining values of Great Outdoors Foundation is innovation, but innovation, as we know, is messy. It hasn't been done before. But at the same time, we're trying to grow into a more sustainable organization with more predictable income streams. So as a CEO, how do you balance innovation with your organization, and how does that affect how you lead the board of directors?
Well, in the real estate business, we're always looking for, obviously, the next big thing, but what is the amount of risk associated with the next big thing? That's one of the most challenging issues for us to address. Is from a risk perspective, it's always what don't you know that you need to know. And with innovation, if you think you're going to be on the forefront, it's hard to find people that can help you identify where those risks are, because it is something that necessarily hasn't been tried and true. So, I mean, I'd say for the most part in our business, we stick to what we know, but you have to, if we're going to innovate in what we're doing, it's timing critical. Where are the opportunities in the next 6 to 12 months? We can't be thinking the opportunities next month after. We develop land into different uses. We take farmland and forest land, and we got one of our most unique developments is happening right now south of Raccoon River in West Des Moines, where it is basically residential lots developed on ridges, where it took probably 100 iterations of mapping out what this project could potentially look like, because you only have so many areas that are flat enough to put streets and provide enough for housing. But those are the types of projects from a real estate perspective that innovation is always a part of it. I've been really challenged to try to find an organization that could 3D model the terrain from for this development, because you can't appreciate it when you're up on a ridge and you've got maybe 100 foot of building land off of the street to pad to put your house. than the drop off to a ravine. Well, it's great because you have that as your backyard. I mean, there's trees and there's little creeks running through it. But at the same time, I don't think you understand the depths of it. And that is, in terms of our industry, is how do we innovate where we can help our future customers understand, because when we pull the trigger on a project like that, we're spending over $12 million to develop land that we hope to be able to sell to our consumers. And we can only do that with innovation and technology.
Love that. As it relates to GOF, you obviously mentioned how technology is impacting your line of work. How do you see AI or technology, and this is way out of left field, but I feel like it's on all of our minds. How do you see that as a benefit to the nonprofit sector, and how do we use technology in our favor to advance our mission?
Well, I have been thinking about AI probably a lot more in the last month than I have in previous 10 years, but I'd start with the fact I'm glad I'm more near the end of my career than the beginning. AI is impacting everything, and I can see why it's so great. The tool ChatGPT, I mean, I think if you haven't used it, you're going to be using it in the next 6 months. I mean, it's just a wonderful tool. But as long as we're using it as a tool and not as an excuse to come up with an easy answer, then I think we're using it the right way. But I'll tell any young kid getting into college, one of the best degrees they can get, whether it's their major or minor, is philosophy. And it creates this ability to critically think. And any person who's going to assume a leadership position in an organization, you're going to be forced to critically think in situations that require snap judgment and answers. And I fear that if we use AI too much as a crutch, we're going to lose that ability. So I think everybody needs to be a little bit careful how much they're using it in their day-to-day life, but it is a wonderful tool, and I just hope at some point in time it doesn't replace all of us.
Yeah, that's the hope. Okay, so Chris, what is one thing, we've spent some time together this morning. What's one thing about GOF or its mission that you want the listener to walk away with today?
I've come so far in my understanding what GOF does, and I want the listener to understand that water quality is one of the main components of what GOF is doing, and it impacts everyone if you're in central Iowa, it has a huge impact here because we are downstream from a lot of runoff from water that starts in the northern part of our state and even Minnesota. So there are, and that gets into our water supply. So clean water is imperative to what we do. Stream bank mitigation is imperative to what we do. We can't lose what we have. And those are issues that I promise you 99% of our population doesn't think about twice. We need organizations like Great Outdoors to lead the way on these types of critical issues. You guys are doing a great job of getting the attention from the public sector and raising awareness and raising funds. The business community is on board because, as we all know, data centers are taking over in terms of real estate uses and water consumption. And the partnerships that you guys have created with data centers, it makes everybody feel good about the amount of water needed for a data center when we can reclaim and they can identify that water is such an important part of conservation in central Iowa, and they're funding certain projects, whether it has a direct benefit to their organization or it's just a general benefit because they need to give back a little bit. So I want people to walk away from this podcast understanding that Great Outdoors is doing something that is so necessary, but you probably haven't thought twice about in your lifetime, but you probably need to be more aware going forward.
Yeah, it's a complex concept to try to break down into simplistic terms, right? I think we deal with that all the time. Kaitie, you're pretty good at doing that.
I know that's the hope of the podcast is we can just keep having 30-minute discussions and hopefully break these down and apply them in real ways, which Chris, you've done a great job doing that. We're going to end today with a fun segment. Something that we love to do at the Great Outdoors Foundation is whiteboard a complex issue or process or an idea. And so today we're ending the podcast with a fun question related to our 30th anniversary. And maybe not for anniversaries, but for birthdays, of course, you have to have cake and ice cream. So the Let's Whiteboard It question for today is, what is your favorite cake and ice cream combination? Go. And you have to write it out.
Do you draw it or write it out?
Either one. Whatever is your choice.
Okay, I got to think about this.
I'd like to point out that orange is my favorite color.
Here, you want to trade?
Hannah,
we can trade.
Hannah stole the orange marker.
And while they're doing that, I'll just remind everybody, you can like and follow the Great Outdoors Foundation on social platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, X, and LinkedIn. These podcasts will be coming out weekly on Thursdays, so make sure to tune in for more discussions with leaders like Chris and hopefully our guest extraordinaire. You want to kick things off with your drawing?
Yeah, I don't know.
You
Is it important for people? I drew. Yeah, I drew angel food cake, which is my mom started me on angel food cake my very first birthday. And I recently turned 60. I know I look a lot older, but anyway, so I have angel food cake for every birthday. And this, for the 60th birthday, I made my own because I am tired of trying to buy angel food cake.
Yeah.
You can't really find any, I call it sponge cake.
Yeah.
But you can't find any good sponge cake. So I made my own, and it was great.
Excellent.
And from an ice cream perspective, I love chocolate syrup way more than any human being should. Hershey's in particular, and raspberries. So if I have Hershey's syrup and raspberries on almost any kind of ice cream, except for mint, I hate mint. I'm completely happy.
That's a really good combo.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like that.
Okay,
you want me to go next?
You
Well, I didn't draw. So I like white cake with fresh fruit filling and chantilly cream.
Yum.
I love that.
Excellent.
But that angel food cake.
For you.
Angel food cake, though, is one of my faves, too.
That is. And I went with the classic chocolate cake, vanilla ice cream. I would say chocolate cake, chocolate frosting, chocolate filling. And then you got to have a little vanilla to cut it. So, yeah.
Well, I have one more story about my mom. Her greatest feat is when she could make a cake that had as much frosting in thickness as there was cake. And I've learned to appreciate that for my entire life. So
Absolutely.
the more frosting, the better.
Absolutely. I think that's like a Happy Disruptors saying for sure. The more frosting, the better.
More frosting, the better.
Yeah. Perfect.
Well, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll have you on again and maybe do some financial talk.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks.